Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Today I'm taking a look at The Empire Strikes Back novelization by Donald F. Glut, based on a story by George Lucas. When I was a kid, of course, Empire was huge. I got to see it twice in theaters, which was a big deal at the time, at least in my family. And obviously, we were hungry for anything Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back related. Toys, yes, but anything. And I think it was maybe a Scholastic book fair or maybe one of those book orders. I convinced my mom to get me this book. And I don't think I ever actually read it. So fast forward 40 years, we're cleaning out my old house. My dad's moving, and there's a box, and inside the box, there's this book. And I thought, well, I don't really need this book per se. Then it occurred to me, you never read it. Why not actually read the thing before you maybe donate it or what have you? So I put it in my pile of paperbacks and finally got to it. Now, I love the movie. This is based on the movie. So obviously, I generally enjoyed the book. So that's not really the point of this review. Maybe this is more of a retrospective. Not just of this book, but of novelizations, movie novelizations in general. It used to be a really big deal. I don't know if they do it anymore or not. They probably do. But pre-VCR, before they were really common and people had access to watching these things, this was a good way to sort of relive a movie. And I have to admit, in reading it, I was definitely reliving the movie. I could see it sort of playing in my head. And in fact, it made me really want to sit down and watch the movie again. So that's really kind of a cool thing about these novelizations. Some were very direct, just right off the movie. Some, like I think the ones Peter David would write, really tried to go even further and sort of give you a solid novel in its own right, rather than just sort of translating the script into book form. So that was one of the great things about these, is sort of reliving the movie. The other is these things were sort of the director's cuts of their day. In order to get the book out at the same time the movie was coming out, they usually had to work off an earlier script, sometimes off of concept art. And so you'll find differences between what you got in the books and what you got on the screen. Now, of course, at this point in time, we get extra footage and it's added to this and added to that. But back then, it was kind of like you were going, oh, there's even more of the story that I was unaware of. And that was really cool. And that's what I wanted to highlight in this little retrospective, were 4 pieces of the book that have some differences from what we saw on screen, and maybe chat a little bit about why. But before I get into them, I also want to talk about the author, Donald F. Glut, or could be pronounced Glut, because he's a really interesting guy. I looked up Wikipedia. I didn't do deep research, but still looked him up on Wikipedia. From 1953 to 1969, he made 41 amateur films ranging from dinosaurs to adaptations of Superman, The Spirit, Spider-Man. In fact, his final film was a Spider-Man film in 1969. Due to publicity that he got in Forrest J. Ackerman's Famous Monsters of Filmland, he was able to get a few slightly bigger named actors for these. Glenn Strange reprised his role as Frankenstein's monster in one of them. And apparently these movies have been released on DVD in a collection called I Was a Teenage Movie Maker, which I'd like to get a hold of. I found some like on eBay, and they're not cheap. But one of these days, I'd like to see some of those films. He also wrote for Gold Key Comics, titles like Dr. Spectre, Dagar the Invincible, Trag and the Sky Gods. He did work for Marvel. He did some Captain America issues. He did some stuff in Vampirella and other Warren Publishing magazines. He later did screenwriting for shows like Shazam, Land of the Lost, Spider-Man, and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, Transformers, GoBots, DuckTales, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, etc. And in the 2000s, he did a bunch of kind of exploitation-style horror flicks. So, wow, man. I mean, this is a guy, this is fandom actually getting, to move up to making actual, product. So that's pretty cool. I was glad that I went ahead and looked him up and found out a few things. So let's look at some of these scenes in particular. Now, the first one that I want to highlight is Han and Leia having their argument in the base on Hoth. So let's see here. Let's catch up. And whenever I do these book reviews, I always do a little excerpt. We're going to make the excerpts count a little bit more here. So, reading from the book. Han. Leia was rushing after him, slightly out of breath. Coolly, he stopped and turned toward her. Yes, Your Highness. I thought you had decided to stay. There seemed to be real concern in Leia's voice, but Han could not be certain. That bounty hunter we ran into on Ord Mantell changed my mind. Does Luke know? She asked. He'll know when he gets back, Han replied gruffly. Princess Leia's eyes narrowed, her gaze judging him with a look he knew well. For a moment, Han felt like one of the icicles on the surface of the planet. Don't give me that look, he said sternly. Every day, more bounty hunters are searching for me. I'm going to pay off Jabba before he sends any more of his remotes, gank killers, and who knows what else. I've got to get this price off my head while I still have a head. Leia was obviously affected by his words, and Han could see that she was concerned for him as well, as, perhaps, feeling something more. But we still need you, she said. We? He asked. Yes. What about you? Han was careful to emphasize the last word, but really wasn't certain why. Maybe it was something he had for some time wanted to say, but had lacked the courage. No, he amended, the stupidity to expose his feelings. At the moment, there seemed to be little to lose, and he was ready for whatever she might say. Me? She said bluntly. I don't know what you mean. Incredulous, Han Solo shook his head. No, you probably don't. And what precisely am I supposed to know? Anger was growing in her voice again, probably because Han thought she was finally beginning to understand. He smiled. You want me to stay because of the way you feel about me. Again, the princess mellowed. Well, yes, you've been a great help, she said, pausing before going on to us. You're a natural leader, but Han refused to let her finish, cutting her off in mid-sentence. No, your worship, that's not it. Suddenly Leia was staring directly into Han's face with eyes that were at last fully understanding. She started to laugh. You're imagining things. Am I? I think you were afraid I was going to leave you without even a... Han's eyes focused on her lips. Kiss. She began to laugh harder now. I'd just as soon kiss a Wookie. I can arrange that. Okay, now, if you've watched the movie, you know that there's a big chunk of that in the middle where he's explaining about Jabba and she's asking, does Luke know, and all that we don't get in the film that was, on screen back in 1980. And there's a little extra as well sprinkled throughout. And I think this, I talked about director's cuts and extra footage. And I have to admit, about 9 times out of 10 when I see extra footage, the first thing I think is, yeah, we really didn't need that. It's sometimes interesting, but generally speaking, I think getting to the point, keeping the script a little tighter is better for the films. Now, I don't know if they changed some of this in a later script or if it was done right then and there by the director, Kirshner, or Harrison Ford. We all know Harrison Ford makes an alteration in the scene where he's being frozen into the carbon carbonite. Where instead of saying I love you, he says I know. So I don't know who made the change, but I do think the change was made for the better. I think it focused nicely. You got your one story once everybody splits up of Luke getting his training and then eventually showing back up at Bespin where we bring everybody back together again. And then you have the story of Han and Leia, C-3PO, Chewbacca, going a different direction. And a lot of the focus on that one is between Han and Leia and their relationship, which I think was very smart for a lot of reasons. And so I think paring that down to focus a little bit more on that, on making that scene more about them without so much extraneous text was quite smart. So let's see what we got next here. So we all know this guy, Yoda, has a funny way of talking. And this is the guy we saw on screen. Really great puppetry. Very popular character. Could potentially not have turned out quite that way. Let's see what the novel says here. So we start with Luke where he's setting up his camp and all that kind of stuff. And he hears a voice. You feel like what? I'm not going to do a Yoda voice. Okay, I'm just not going to do it. You feel like what? That wasn't R2's voice. Luke leaped up, grabbed his pistol, then spun around, peering into the gloom to try to find the source of those words. As he turned, he saw a tiny creature standing directly in front of him. Luke immediately stepped back in surprise. This little being seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. It stood no more than half a meter in height, fearlessly holding its ground in front of the towering youth who wielded an awesome laser pistol. The little wizened thing could have been any age. Its face was deeply lined, but was framed with elfin pointed ears that gave it a look of eternal youth. Long white hair was parted down the middle and hung down on either side of the blue-skinned head. The being was bipedal and stood on short legs that terminated in tridactyl, almost reptilian feet. It wore rags as gray as the mists of the swamp, and in such tatters that they must have approximated the creature's very age. Okay, so we get a little bit of that description here. The feet, the clothes, the ears. Although the ears don't make him look younger, I would say. But we also get long white hair parted down the middle and blue skin. Now, of course, if you're a big Star Wars fan, you know about the concept art for Yoda. At one point, frankly, he was going to look a lot like Papa Smurf. And over time, they changed it. They mellowed it a little bit. But you see there that hint, the suggestion of the long white hair. Now, the long white hair probably would not have been a problem. Maybe it wouldn't have flowed right. Maybe it wouldn't have looked right. Maybe it would have gotten in the way. But the blue skin, that could have been disastrous. And the reason why is, of course, Yoda is voiced by Frank Oz, who also voiced a lot of Muppets, as we all know, including Grover. Yoda sounds a little like Grover. And I have a feeling if they'd gone for the blue skin, it would have looked just very Muppety. Now, I mean, it's not a perfect special effect to begin with, but it looks pretty good. And I remember it was very, very convincing to us at the time, watching it in the theaters. Oh, I mean, you know it's not real, obviously, but Yoda felt alive. He felt real. You make him blue, I don't know. It could be the same way a lot of people really don't like the Ewoks. I think it's possible people could have felt the same way about Yoda. Which would have been tragic because He's such a great little character. So moving away from our Jedi Master, back to our quarreling lovebirds, we get another good scene between those two when they are in the belly of the beast in the asteroid. And, it's really for their storyline, it's really the scene. This is when it all comes together and changes kind of everything. So let's see how it goes in the book. And we're starting, of course, talking about Han. He noticed that Leia had finished her welding, but was having trouble re-engaging the valve, struggling with a lever that simply would not budge. He moved toward her and began offering to help, but she coldly turned her back to him and continued her battle with the valve. Easy, your worship. Only trying to help. Still struggling with the lever, Leia asked quietly, "Would you please stop calling me that?" Han was surprised at the princess's simple tone. He had expected a stinging retort, or at best, a cold silence. But her words were missing the mocking tone that he was accustomed to hearing. Was she finally bringing their relentless battle of wills to an end? Sure, he said gently. You make things difficult sometimes, Leia said as she shyly glanced at him. He had to agree. I do, I really do. But he added, you could be a little nicer too. Come on, admit it, sometimes you think I'm all right. She let go of the lever and rubbed her sore hand. Sometimes, she said with a little smile. Maybe, occasionally, when you aren't acting like the scoundrel. Scoundrel, he laughed, finding her choice of words endearing. I like the sound of that. Without another word, he reached for Leia's hand and began to massage it. Stop it, Leia protested. Han continued to hold her hand. Stop what? He asked softly. Leia felt flustered, confused, embarrassed. 100 things in that moment. But her sense of dignity prevailed. Stop that, she said regally. My hands are dirty. Han smiled at her feeble excuse, but held on to her hand and looked right into her eyes. My hands are dirty, too. What are you afraid of? Afraid? She returned his direct gaze. Of getting my hands dirty. That's why you're trembling. Oh, that's why you're trembling? He asked. He could see that she was affected by his closeness and by his touch, and her expression softened, whereupon he reached out and took her other hand. I think you like me because I'm a scoundrel, he said. I think you haven't had enough scoundrels in your life. As he spoke, he slowly drew her near. Leia didn't resist his gentle pull. Now, as she looked at him, she thought he had never seemed more handsome, but she was still the princess. I happen to like nice men, she chided in a whisper. And I'm not nice? Han asked, teasing. Chewbacca stuck his head out from the overhead compartment and watched the proceedings unnoticed. Yes, she whispered, but you... Before she could finish, Han Solo drew her to him and felt her body tremble as he pressed his lips to hers. It seemed forever, it seemed an eternity to share between them. As he gently bent her body back, this time she didn't resist at all. When they parted, Leia needed a moment to catch her breath. She tried to regain her composure and work up a measure of indignation, but she found it difficult to talk. Okay, hotshot, she began. But then she stopped and suddenly found herself kissing him, pulling him even closer than before. When their lips finally parted, Han held Leia in his arms, that as they looked at each other. It's such a steamy scene, obviously. My glasses are fogging up here. For a moment, there was a peaceful kind of emotion between them. Then Leia began to draw away, her thoughts and feelings in turmoil. She averted her eyes and began to disengage herself from Han's embrace. In the next second, she turned and rushed from the cabin. Okay. So a lot of the dialogue here stays pretty much the same. But I think we got two real big differences from what we got in the film. Han is pulling her to him for the kiss. Now, in the film, he's leaning in to kiss her. Not a huge difference, but it is slightly different body language. It does set things up a little bit differently. And then, of course, in the film, as they're kissing, suddenly C-3PO busts in and ruins the moment. Perfect C-3PO scene. It's what you expect. This separates them. Okay, here, they kiss again, with her pulling him in. And then she tries to, or no, I'm sorry. First, she tries to sort of like get out of it, try to be indignant. She can't. She pulls him in, kisses him again, and then she, disengages and kind of runs off to her cabin. So not a massively different scene. I do think I like it better as it plays in the film, though, than it reads on the page. With him leaning in to her, and here, like, we're about to get this really obvious, like, this is it. The way it breaks off in the film with C-3PO says, okay, maybe deep down she's going to think it's a mistake. Maybe nothing else is going to transpire. It still keeps you've had this moment. The audience is like, oh, they kissed. But it could still go another way. So the tension of the relationship remains. And then, of course, when you have the whole carbonite scene, that's really what seals it. Which is smart. It's more towards the end of the film. Don't give it up now. Make everybody wait a little bit. So some minor changes, but I think, I think they make sense and work better in the film than in the book. All right, final scene. This one is also somewhat minor, but it was one that I really noticed when I was reading it. So obviously we've gone through this fight between Vader and Luke, which is a little bit different. It plays much better on the screen than it does here. And we get Luke out onto the gantry. And so we'll start the text here. The wind that shrieked through the reactor shaft entirely absorbed the sounds of the clashing lightsabers. Luke moved agilely across the gantry and took refuge beneath a huge instrument panel to evade his pursuing foe. But Vader was there in an instant, his lightsaber thrashing down like a pulsating guillotine blade, cutting the instrument complex loose. The complex began to fall, but was abruptly caught by the wind and blown upward. An instant of distraction was all Vader needed. As the instrument panel floated away, Luke involuntarily glanced at it. At that second, the Dark Lord's laser blade came slashing down across Luke's hand, cutting it, and sending the youth's lightsaber flying. The pain was excruciating. Luke smelled the terrible odor of his own seared flesh and squeezed his forearm beneath his armpit to try to stop the agony. He stepped backward along the gantry until he reached its extreme end, stalked all the while by the black-garbed apparition. And then, of course, we get to the good stuff, I am your father, etc. But you'll notice the big change here. And it turns out to not be a change, but at the time, it seemed like it was going to be. He slashes the hand. Doesn't say anything about the hand being lopped off. Now, that was a big thing in the movie. That was incredible. I mean, because especially, as kids, most of us, we were rooting for Luke Skywalker. That was our guy. Han was cool. You get older, it's all Han. But when we were kids, come on, Luke's the hero. And to see that happen to him, to see him defeated in that way, and to be like, there's no way he can get out of this. Oh my gosh, that was something else. Here, the hand is slashed, he drops the lightsaber, and he's in agony. But doesn't appear that it gets chopped off. Now, in the final bit, we do get this. Here we go. Luke Skywalker rested in the medical center of the Rebel Star Cruiser, where he was attended by the surgeon droid called 21B. Rather than 227. That was called 21B. The youth sat quietly, thoughtfully, while 21B gently began to look at his wounded hand. Gazing up, Luke saw Leia, followed by C-3PO and R2-D2 entering the medical center to check his progress and perhaps bring him a little cheer. But Luke knew that the best therapy he had received yet aboard this cruiser was in the radiant image before him. So, definitely at that point. Now, when I was reading it later, I was like, oh, maybe he did. And then it hits me right there. No, he does not lose his hand in the book. It's still there. And it's being sort of, well, okay, so it gets a little confusing because then we get raising his hand. Luke offered it to the expert service of 21B. The surgeon droid examined the bionic hand that was skillfully fused to Luke's arm. Okay, so, but did it get chopped off by Vader, or was it so damaged they had to replace it? Because we're also talking about looking at his wounded hand. You know, was 21B holding his severed hand in front of him, taking a look at it? It's a little confusing there. Now, obviously, the losing the hand is a special effect that has to be planned ahead of time. It's not like Kirshner could say, just stick your hand in your sleeve and make it look like it's not there. So at some point they decided to make that very obvious what happened. But maybe in the script it wasn't. Luke being saved was also done a little bit differently. And frankly, kind of stupidly, because essentially what we get in the film, obviously, the Millennium Falcon zooms in, kind of hovers, picks Luke up, he goes down into the thing, zooms off. And then they finally fix the hyperdrive. In this one, Luke falls from the thing and lands on the moving Millennium Falcon. Thunk, 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 and barely holds on. And it's kind of a part of you going, okay, the Force, fine, but I mean, that's kind of stupid. If he hits the windshield of the Millennium Falcon, he's going to be like a big tick that just got hit by a semi on the highway. So that, I think the way they changed it for the film obviously works quite a bit better. So there we have Star, The Empire Strike Back Wars, the novelization by Donald F. Glut, working off an older script. Still a fun read, still kind of brings it alive for you, and it was great when you were a kid. Because even though I didn't read this one, I did read a couple other novelizations in my day. And it was just, if you were just really obsessed with one of these things, and if you could have, you would have sat in a theater all day long watching Empire Strikes Back. This was about the closest way you could get to do that back then. And it's good, and it is interesting to see how things change before they get to screen. Maybe sometimes on set, maybe sometimes in the editing booth, but I think usually making the story better. There are a few cases where the novelization is better than the film. It does happen. Maybe because they cut too much or it's an expert. But I think in the case of the Star Wars films, and of course we all know a little bit about the editing that went on for Star Wars itself, I think generally speaking, the editing improved most films. Made them tighter, stuck harder to the themes, got rid of the extraneous stuff, and really, got down to business. So there you go. The Empire Strikes Back novelization by Donald F. Glut. It only took me 40 years, maybe a little more than 40 years, to finally read this book. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for getting it for me. Your money was not entirely wasted. Oh, and by the way, we can bring that up here. I don't know if it'll focus on it. Probably not. The price is $2.25. Not too bad. Not too bad. So what are your thoughts? Are you another who has read the novelization, or maybe any of those Star Wars novelizations? What did you think of them? Did you like the novelizations better than the movies? Did you like the movies better than the novelizations? Or were you happy to have both? Leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say and chat about it. If you have any questions, please ask. I'd be happy to answer them if I can. Until next time, please like, subscribe, share with a friend. It helps my channel grow, and I really appreciate it. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun. Read a book, for crying out loud. It's good for you. And I will see you, hopefully soon, in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.